It was the kind of whisper that begins in hushed corners, the kind that travels from private drawing rooms to the inboxes of select journalists without ever leaving a trail. In a palace famed for its secrets, this one carried a sting sharper than most. The claim was simple yet devastating. The pregnancy the world had been told to celebrate, the fairy tale baby that was supposed to cement Meghan Markle's place in royal history, may never have happened at all. And the person allegedly holding the proof wasn't an outsider or an enemy in the press. It was Princess Catherine herself. The scene outside Kensington Palace was ordinary enough that afternoon. Tourists snapping photos, a light drizzle softening the air, the hum of London traffic in the distance. But behind closed doors, tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Rumors had been circulating for years about Meghan's so-called moon bump, whispers of fabric folds where there should have been firmness, and videos that seemed to show a pregnant belly behaving in ways biology could not explain. But rumors alone could be ignored, dismissed, or drowned in sympathetic headlines. What couldn't be so easily brushed aside was Catherine, future queen, respected, restrained, and never known for making reckless accusations, allegedly stepping forward with something she claimed would silence the guessing game forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very beginning, Meghan's journey into royal motherhood had been painted with strokes of glamour and anticipation. The glowing photos of her cradling her belly at official events. The tailored designer dresses chosen to show just enough bump without ever seeming unkempt. The carefully staged interviews where she spoke about motherhood in abstract terms, never quite revealing the kind of intimate details most expecting mothers share freely. To the adoring public, it was part of her charm. To skeptics, it was a series of calculated moves, designed to build an image rather than reveal a truth. Catherine had kept her thoughts to herself during those months. Publicly, she played the part of the supportive sister-in-law, smiling alongside Meghan at events, never allowing the camera to capture even the hint of doubt. But privately, those close to her say she noticed inconsistencies, not in Meghan's words, but in the mechanics of her pregnancy. Catherine had been pregnant 3 times herself, endured the morning sickness, the changes in posture, the subtle swelling of hands and face. She knew the difference between natural movement and something being staged. And yet, for years, she said nothing. It wasn't until a single, quiet moment, away from the press, away from palace advisors, that Catherine allegedly saw something that turned her suspicion into certainty. A photograph, not of Meghan, but of something chillingly close. The image showed what appeared to be a hyper-realistic reborn doll, dressed in the kind of exquisite, custom-made infant clothes usually reserved for royal babies. Its features, down to the arch of its eyebrows, the curl of its lips, were an uncanny match for the infant the world had been introduced to as Archie Harrison. But what made Catherine's heart race wasn't just the similarity. It was the fact that this very doll was listed for sale on eBay by a seller whose account history raised far too many questions to ignore. The palace has always been a place where image is currency, where the story the public is told can matter as much as the truth behind it. And for Meghan, the image of motherhood was perhaps her most powerful shield. To strip that away would not only unravel her public identity, but threaten the carefully built Sussex brand. Catherine would have known the stakes. She would have known that revealing such a thing could fracture what little remained of the relationship between the two couples. Yet, according to those who claim to have knowledge of the situation, she pressed forward, not with tabloid leaks, not with theatrical accusations, but with a slow, meticulous gathering of details that could withstand scrutiny. The public first caught wind of trouble not through an official statement, but through Catherine's body language. At a charity gala, months after the Sussexes stepped back from royal duties, cameras caught Catherine glancing sharply toward Meghan during a brief encounter. There was no smile, no polite warmth, just a fleeting expression that suggested the weight of unspoken history. The clip went viral in hours, with online sleuths dissecting every frame. And then came the quiet planting of seeds. A conversation here, an offhand remark there, the kind of discreet nudges that encourage journalists to start digging. Soon, photographs of Archie were being re-examined. Why were there so few? Why did they seem more like editorial shoots than family snapshots? Why, in certain angles, Did the child's skin texture seem oddly smooth, almost plasticky under bright light? Questions began to pile up, and Catherine never had to utter a word in public for the narrative to start shifting. Behind the scenes, Meghan was reportedly livid. Those close to her described slammed doors, frantic phone calls to lawyers, and emergency meetings with PR strategists. The doll rumors, once fringe conspiracy fodder, were now being discussed in mainstream entertainment segments. And at the center of the storm was the suspicion that Catherine had quietly handed someone, somewhere, the thread that could unravel it all. But this wasn't just about a doll on eBay. This was about the perception of deception, about whether Meghan had used a child as a prop to secure sympathy, attention, and a narrative that could not easily be fact-checked. The idea was shocking enough to capture global attention, yet delicate enough that the palace remained officially silent. No statements, no denials, no confirmations, just the sound of public opinion shifting, one headline at a time. By now, Meghan's relationship with Catherine was said to be beyond repair. What had once been polite frostiness had hardened into open disdain. In private, Meghan accused Catherine of orchestrating a campaign to destroy her credibility. Catherine, for her part, allegedly told close confidants she was acting to protect the integrity of the monarchy itself. And yet, for all the whispers, one thing remained constant. The public had never been given definitive proof. There was no single photograph, no leaked document, no official confession that tied every rumor together in a way that could withstand legal challenge. But Catherine's alleged discovery of the doll was different. It was tangible. It was traceable. And if the right people got their hands on the right evidence, it could force a reckoning Meghan could not PR spin her way out of. The tension came to a head one rainy afternoon when both couples attended a memorial service. Meghan, dressed impeccably as always, avoided Catherine's gaze. Catherine, standing a few steps away, kept her eyes forward. Photographers captured the moment, two women bound by royal titles yet divided by something much deeper. To the public, it was a silent standoff. To those who claimed to know the truth, it was the visible tip of a conflict that had been brewing for years. This was no longer just a matter of family disagreement. It was a matter of legacy, of the monarchy's public trust, of whether a royal birth had been the fairy tale it was sold as, or an elaborate illusion built on an eBay listing and a silicone mold. And as the world leaned in to watch, the quiet war between Catherine and Meghan threatened to spill into full public view. The weeks that followed saw the rumors evolve into something sharper, almost weaponized. Social media was flooded with side-by-side comparisons, screenshots of Archie's rare public appearances next to promotional images of high-end reborn dolls sold online. Some of the resemblances were uncanny, others were pure speculation. But the more these images circulated, the more people began to question why the Sussexes had been so selective about showing their son in public. Every missed birthday photo, every cropped shot, every over-filtered Instagram post was now reinterpreted through a new, more suspicious lens. Palace insiders claimed Catherine remained outwardly calm but privately resolute. She was said to have kept a small folder, a physical, paper file, containing screenshots, printed eBay listings, and discreetly acquired photographs. To her, this wasn't just idle gossip. It was a matter of institutional credibility. If the monarchy allowed such a deception to go unchallenged, what else might the public believe it was capable of hiding? And for a family already navigating scandals ranging from political leaks to historical controversies, this was one deception too far. Meghan's circle, meanwhile, scrambled to frame the narrative differently. Allies suggested that the rumors were rooted in racism, jealousy, and the press's relentless obsession with tearing her down. They argued that Archie was being protected from the intrusive cameras that had haunted the royal children before him. And to an extent, this explanation resonated with some of the public, especially her staunchest defenders. But even those inclined to believe her began to notice the defensive tone, the lack of direct proof, and the refusal to simply provide an unfiltered, unambiguous image of the child in a natural setting. The tension wasn't confined to public perception. Within royal circles, the dynamic between Harry and Catherine began to shift as well. Harry, once his sister-in-law's warm ally, now saw her as a dangerous opponent. According to one source close to the family, he accused her of planting landmines in the press. Catherine reportedly responded, in private, that she was simply refusing to lie. That remark, if true, was a deliberate escalation, a suggestion that silence on the matter equated to dishonesty. By late autumn, the situation reached a boiling point when a well-connected royal correspondent published a cryptic article about inconsistencies in the record of the Sussex child. The piece avoided naming Meghan or Archie outright, but the allusions were obvious to anyone paying attention. It described untraceable birth documentation and anomalies in early imagery, and concluded with a tantalizing line. One senior royal may be in possession of material that could resolve these questions once and for all. The timing was no accident. The public conversation turned frenzied. Morning talk shows debated the ethics of hiding a royal child from public view. Online commentators dissected every archival clip of Meghan during her pregnancy, analyzing her posture, the sway of her belly, even the crease patterns in her dresses. Theories blossomed, some outlandish, some chillingly logical. And hovering over it all was the idea that Catherine, without ever making a public statement, had already tipped the first domino. Meghan, according to reports from her California circle, was seething. Friends described her pacing rooms late at night, reading articles aloud in disbelief, and drafting furious rebuttals that her advisors begged her not to release. She allegedly felt betrayed not just by Catherine, but by the institution she had once represented. To her, this wasn't about a doll or an eBay listing. It was about a campaign to strip her of legitimacy, to erase her from the royal narrative entirely. But the thing about palace secrets is that they rarely stay confined. If one person knows, eventually two will know. And if two know, eventually 20 will know. The reborn doll story had crossed that threshold. The seller's account had been traced, not to a random collector overseas, but to a network of high-end hobbyists with links to London. The description on the original listing, now scrubbed from public view, had reportedly referenced custom orders for high-profile clients. For Catherine, this was more than a smoking gun. It was a trail of breadcrumbs leading somewhere the public had not yet dared to follow. She knew that the truth, if ever fully revealed, would send shockwaves not just through the monarchy, but through every brand and organization that had aligned itself with the Sussexes. And she knew that Meghan, backed into a corner, would fight like hell to prevent that revelation from reaching daylight. As winter set in, the chill between the two women became impossible to mask. At a charity concert, Meghan and Catherine were photographed on opposite sides of the venue, neither acknowledging the other. To casual observers, it might have seemed like a scheduling coincidence. But to those aware of the undercurrent, it was a silent declaration. The battle lines had been drawn, and reconciliation was no longer on the table. For the public, this was still a story without an ending. For the women at the center of it, it was a war in progress. And somewhere, in a locked drawer or a guarded safe, lay the piece of evidence that could settle it forever, a piece that, if Catherine chose to use it, would not just humiliate Meghan, but redefine how history remembered her time in the royal family. This was no longer just rumor. It was a collision course. And as the whispers grew louder, one question hung over the entire saga, a question that would determine the fate of reputations, alliances, and perhaps the monarchy itself. When the moment came, would Catherine make her move? From the moment Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was announced, the royal PR machine shifted into high gear. Press releases from the palace were carefully worded, the media briefings precise, and every photograph seemed crafted to project an image of joy, anticipation, and unity. The announcement itself had been timed to perfection. Delivered just as Meghan and Harry returned from a successful royal tour, ensuring maximum media coverage. It was the kind of moment that made front pages around the world. The American actress turned Duchess of Sussex was carrying the next royal baby, a symbol of modernity and diversity in a centuries-old institution. In those first days after the announcement, the coverage was almost universally positive. Headlines gushed about the fresh air Meghan was bringing to the monarchy. Editorials painted the pregnancy as a historic moment, with some even suggesting that Archie would be a bridge between cultures, proof that the royal family was evolving with the times. Harry beamed during public appearances. Meghan cradled her belly with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly how to work a camera, and the palace basked in the goodwill the news generated. But beneath the smooth, glittering surface, a few odd details began to register with those who had seen royal pregnancies before. Meghan's bump seemed to appear rather quickly, catching some by surprise. Catherine, when she had announced her pregnancies, had shown only the faintest signs of change in the early months. Yet Meghan, barely into her second trimester by official timelines, seemed already well along. In photographs from an engagement just weeks after the announcement, her belly appeared pronounced enough to prompt speculation that she might be further along than stated. Of course, royal watchers are used to playing guessing games about due dates. But Meghan's pregnancy carried another layer of fascination and soon, controversy. Her public appearances during this time were numerous, each one offering photographers new angles, new material for front-page spreads. From designer gowns at evening galas to casual maternity coats on chilly morning visits, Meghan was always camera-ready. The coverage was relentless, and the Duchess appeared to thrive under it, smiling radiantly as flashbulbs popped. Her habit of placing both hands on her stomach became one of the most talked-about aspects of her pregnancy. To supporters, it was a touching display of maternal affection, a visible sign of connection between mother and child. To critics, it was a calculated gesture, repeated so often that it began to feel staged. The British press, never shy about pouncing on royal quirks, ran pieces questioning why Meghan seemed to cradle her belly even in situations where it was unnecessary, such as while seated or indoors away from the public gaze. The speculation was that the gesture was less about comfort and more about creating iconic imagery for the cameras. By the midpoint of her pregnancy, Meghan's bump had become almost as famous as she was. But this fame came with scrutiny. On at least 2 occasions, video footage appeared to show the bump shifting unnaturally as she moved, creating an optical illusion that her belly was folding inwards or bouncing in a way that didn't match natural anatomy. These clips, shared widely online, were dismissed by her defenders as tricks of the camera and dress fabric, but to others, they were red flags. Adding to the oddity was Meghan's energy level. Those who have experienced pregnancy often recall the fatigue, the slowed movements, the physical adjustments that come with carrying a child. Meghan, however, seemed to move with ease, bending to greet children at events, crouching in heels, and striding up steps without hesitation. Admirers framed this as proof of her vitality and fitness. Skeptics wondered if it was something else entirely, if perhaps there was less physical strain because there was no baby to carry. The baby shower in New York was another turning point in the public narrative. Hosted by close friends in a penthouse suite, it was a lavish affair that seemed at odds with traditional royal discretion. Helicopters hovered overhead, photographers camped outside, and designer-clad guests came and went in full view of the press. Meghan was photographed leaving the hotel in a form-fitting dress that once again displayed her bump prominently. The event became a symbol of her unique approach to royal life, blending Hollywood glamour with royal status. But it also fueled whispers about how calculated her public appearances had become. What the public didn't know then was that behind closed doors, there were already tensions brewing within the family. Catherine, who had endured her own pregnancies under intense scrutiny, found Meghan's approach to be unusually theatrical. According to insiders, Catherine had observed moments during joint appearances where Meghan's bump seemed to change shape depending on posture or movement. These might have been written off as harmless illusions, except that Catherine's instincts told her otherwise. As Meghan's due date approached, the palace began to limit media access. Gone were the traditional photo calls outside the hospital, the kind that had introduced royal babies to the world for decades. Instead, the Sussexes announced they would be handling the birth privately and would share images only when they were ready. For some, this was a refreshing break from intrusive tradition. For others, it was another brick in the wall of secrecy that had begun to surround the pregnancy. When Archie was finally introduced to the world, it was in a tightly controlled photo call inside Windsor Castle. The baby was swaddled in a white blanket, his face barely visible, and Meghan stood beside Harry with the same glowing smile she had worn throughout her pregnancy. The moment should have silenced all doubts, but for some, it had the opposite effect. The baby's brief appearance, the absence of hospital footage, and the continued lack of candid family photographs only deepened the suspicion that something wasn't right. In the months that followed, the scarcity of new images added fuel to the fire. Each official photograph of Archie was carefully staged, often showing him partially turned away or obscured by shadows. Public outings were non-existent. Meghan and Harry explained this as a desire to protect their son's privacy, but the secrecy only reinforced the narrative building among skeptics. That the child was not as he had been presented, and that the pregnancy itself might not have been real. Looking back, the perfect pregnancy narrative was both a triumph and a trap. It generated endless headlines, solidified Meghan's role as a modern royal icon, and created a bank of photographs that would define her public image for years. But it also left a trail of inconsistencies, small details, strange choices, and unexplained decisions that, when pieced together, formed a pattern impossible to ignore. And at the center of this pattern was the question Catherine had begun to quietly ask herself. Was any of it real? The stage was set. The public saw the fairy tale. Catherine saw the cracks in the glass. And somewhere in between, the truth waited, ready to shatter everything the world thought it knew about Meghan's royal motherhood. The first public doubts didn't erupt all at once. They crept in slowly, like a hairline fracture in glass that no one notices until it splinters. At first, the narrative of Meghan's pregnancy was so carefully curated, so relentlessly polished, that questioning it seemed almost unthinkable. The palace's communications team, already skilled in managing royal optics, had ensured that Meghan's every public appearance was paired with glowing headlines and sympathetic coverage. For months, it seemed to work. But cracks began to form, and they started in places the palace could not fully control, the unfiltered eyes of the public. It began with a few grainy clips. During a visit to a community center, Meghan bent down to greet a small child, her hands braced on her knees. In the moment she moved forward, the front of her dress appeared to collapse inward, creating the illusion of a fold in her stomach where, by all logic, there shouldn't have been one. The video was replayed countless times online. Some dismissed it instantly: camera trickery, poor fabric choice, an unflattering angle. Others weren't so quick to wave it away. Those who had been pregnant themselves recognized that a baby bump, especially one so far along, did not behave like that. Within days, another clip surfaced, this time from a royal engagement in Birkenhead. Meghan stepped out of a car, smiling and waving to the crowd. As she adjusted her coat and walked toward the waiting dignitaries, a distinct bounce could be seen in her midsection, something that struck some viewers as unusual for a solidly pregnant belly. The footage spread across social media like wildfire, spawning threads and comment sections full of speculation. Was it simply a matter of loose clothing and movement? Or was something artificial at play? In the traditional royal press pack, whispers started circulating too. Photographers who had covered Catherine's pregnancies noted the differences, not just in appearance, but in posture and movement. Meghan's bump seemed to change size subtly from one engagement to another, even within a short span of days. In one set of photos, she appeared heavily pregnant, her silhouette full and rounded. In another, taken only a week later, her bump seemed noticeably smaller, as though it had deflated. The fluctuations were easy to dismiss individually, but when compiled over time, they painted a picture that didn't quite match the official timeline. This was the kind of story the palace dreaded, not because it was overtly scandalous yet, but because it was slippery. The more it was discussed online, the more it became a self-feeding cycle. Once doubt takes root, every photograph is scrutinized, every video slowed down, every shadow or wrinkle in fabric reinterpreted as evidence. The palace could issue statements, but each denial would only serve to amplify the rumors. So instead, they opted for silence. That silence, however, had unintended consequences. In the absence of official explanations, independent investigators began to fill the void. Social media sleuths collected dozens of clips and still images into side-by-side comparisons, complete with arrows and captions pointing out what they saw as inconsistencies. One particularly popular compilation video overlaid footage of Meghan with commentary from women who had experienced pregnancy, each offering her view on why certain movements seemed off. While some argued in Meghan's defense, others were blunt in their assessment. The bump didn't look real. The speculation reached a new level during a high-profile appearance at the National Theatre. Meghan arrived in a cream dress that clung to her figure, accentuating her bump more than usual. In the photographs, the belly shape appeared slightly angular rather than naturally rounded. Fashion experts attributed this to the structure of the dress and its seams, but in the court of public opinion, it became yet another piece of evidence that something about the pregnancy wasn't genuine. Inside palace walls, there was discomfort. This was not the kind of scrutiny a royal pregnancy was supposed to attract. With Catherine's 3 children, the media frenzy had been intense but predictable. Questions about due dates, speculation on names, endless discussions of maternity fashion. But Meghan's pregnancy was being dissected in a way that felt more forensic, more accusatory. The palace communications team debated whether to address the rumors head-on or continue ignoring them, but no consensus was reached. Ultimately, the choice was made to carry on as though nothing unusual was happening. That decision only emboldened the skeptics. Without pushback, they began to dig deeper. Some trawled through official press photographs in search of inconsistencies, noting differences in the bump's height or firmness between engagements. Others analyzed Meghan's gait, claiming that her balance and movement didn't reflect the changes in center of gravity typical in later pregnancy. Theories proliferated, some plausible, others outlandish. A growing faction began to use the phrase moon bump, a term borrowed from the world of theatrical prosthetics, to suggest that Meghan was wearing a removable artificial belly. It was around this time that Catherine's role in the unfolding drama quietly shifted. She had not been the source of these online theories, at least not directly, but she could not ignore them either. In private, she began to keep mental notes, even discreetly comparing her own pregnancy experiences to what she saw of Meghan's. When she attended events alongside her sister-in-law, she was careful not to show her thoughts on her face, but the tension between them was becoming increasingly apparent to those close enough to notice. The public's first hint of a divide came during a Commonwealth Day service. Seated a few rows apart, Meghan and Catherine exchanged only the briefest of acknowledgments. Cameras captured the moment, and the footage became yet another viral talking point. Body language experts were invited onto morning television shows to interpret the interaction, or lack thereof. Was it simply a case of 2 women preoccupied with their own roles, or was it something deeper? By now, the pregnancy doubts were firmly embedded in the public consciousness. Even mainstream media outlets, while careful not to make outright accusations, began referencing online speculation in their coverage. Each mention legitimized the idea a little more, planting it in the minds of casual readers who might never have sought it out otherwise. What had started as scattered whispers was now a recognized subplot in Meghan's royal story. One of the most pivotal moments in the early stages of this doubt came during Meghan's appearance at a charity event where she sat on a low chair to speak with attendees. As she lowered herself into the seat, the bump appeared to shift upward before settling back into place, a motion that defied the expectations of a rigid, late-term pregnancy belly. Again, this could have been a trick of the dress or the way she moved. But the clips circulated widely, replayed in slow motion, with captions that left little to the imagination. By the time her due date was approaching, Meghan's pregnancy had transformed from a celebrated event into a contested spectacle. Supporters accused her critics of cruelty and obsession. Detractors accused her of manipulating public sentiment through deception. In the middle of it all, the palace continued to say nothing, perhaps believing the storm would pass on its own. It did not. Instead, the doubts hardened into a permanent fixture of Meghan's public image, something that would follow her long after she and Harry left royal life. For Catherine, these months marked the beginning of a private decision-making process. She had not yet acted on her own suspicions, but she was quietly weighing the cost of staying silent against the potential fallout of speaking up. The doubts were no longer confined to fringe corners of the internet. They were in living rooms, on talk shows, and in the whispered conversations of people who had once accepted the pregnancy without question. And if Catherine truly had seen something tangible, something that could not be explained away, then the day might come when she would have to decide whether to keep it locked away or bring it into the light. For now, she said nothing. But the first public doubts had already cracked the surface, and the truth, whatever it was, would no longer be easy to hide. If the public's doubts about Meghan's pregnancy were a fire slowly spreading across the landscape, Catherine's private observations were the sparks that had been smoldering long before the flames took hold. She had been in the unique position of watching the whole spectacle unfold from the inside, seeing not only what the cameras captured, but also the quieter, less rehearsed moments that happened away from the press. And for someone like Catherine, who had experienced 3 pregnancies under the relentless scrutiny of the royal spotlight, these moments were impossible to ignore. From the earliest days of Meghan's pregnancy announcement, Catherine noticed subtleties that others might have missed. In official engagements, Meghan moved with the kind of freedom and physical ease that Catherine remembered longing for, but never having in her own later stages. There was no careful shifting of weight, no instinctive hand bracing her back after long hours on her feet. Meghan could drop into a crouch to greet a child, stand up without hesitation, and continue walking as if she hadn't just carried the extra weight of a baby inside her. At first, Catherine chalked it up to differences in body type and fitness levels. Meghan was an actress, accustomed to physical training, and perhaps she simply maintained her strength better than Catherine had during her pregnancies. But that theory began to crumble as the months passed, and Meghan's physical presentation seemed increasingly inconsistent. Some days, the bump appeared high and tight. On others, it seemed lower or noticeably smaller. Even allowing for differences in wardrobe, the changes were more pronounced than Catherine had ever experienced or seen in other pregnant women. One particularly telling moment came during a joint engagement in late winter. Meghan arrived in a tailored dress that showcased her bump in a way the press loved. But as the day went on and they moved from one event to another, Catherine noticed the silhouette had subtly changed. Under certain lighting, the curve looked less rounded and more angular, as though something underneath had shifted. For a woman in the advanced stages of pregnancy, this was unusual. Then there was Meghan's habit of cradling her belly with both hands at nearly every opportunity. While Catherine understood the instinct, she herself had done it unconsciously at times. Meghan's version felt deliberate, almost performative. In small, private moments when no photographers were nearby, Meghan still kept a hand poised protectively over her stomach, as if she knew she could be photographed from any angle at any time. It was the kind of gesture that might have gone unnoticed if it weren't so constant. Catherine also began noticing the reactions of others around Meghan. Medical staff at certain events seemed unusually deferential, more focused on maintaining an image than attending to practical details. At one function, Meghan was offered a seat, which she declined, insisting she was perfectly comfortable. Catherine remembered being grateful for a seat in her later months, even if only for a few minutes. She found herself wondering whether Meghan's refusal was meant to project strength, or whether she truly wasn't experiencing the physical strain at all. There was another detail, subtle but unsettling. During Catherine's pregnancies, royal aides had always carried certain precautionary items: bottled water, light snacks, a plan for quick medical assistance if needed. She had noticed that with Meghan, the aides seemed less concerned. There were no quiet whispers about ensuring Meghan avoided long stretches on her feet, no discreet reminders to pause between events. It was as if, behind the scenes, no one was worried about her physical condition in the way they normally would with an expectant mother. One moment that stayed with Catherine occurred during a private tea at Clarence's house. The gathering was small, just a few senior royals and advisors, and Meghan was wearing a fitted sweater dress that accentuated her bump. As Meghan stood to pour herself more tea, Catherine's eyes were drawn to the way the fabric shifted across her midsection. For a brief second, it seemed to ripple unnaturally, almost like a garment being adjusted rather than a body in motion. Catherine said nothing at the time, but she felt the first flicker of certainty that what she was seeing was not typical. As the pregnancy progressed, Catherine quietly began cataloging these observations in her mind. She didn't share them with the press, and she didn't even voice them to William right away. The stakes were too high, and any accusation, spoken aloud before she had something concrete, would be dangerous. But she began to pay closer attention, watching Meghan with a kind of detached scrutiny that Meghan herself may have sensed. Their interactions grew frostier. Meghan, perhaps aware of Catherine's watchfulness, seemed to avoid lingering near her sister-in-law during events. When they did exchange words, it was cordial but clipped, lacking the warmth they had once tried to project. Catherine suspected Meghan knew she had noticed things, small inconsistencies that most people wouldn't think twice about. What made this all the more difficult was the palace environment itself. The monarchy thrives on maintaining a united front, on presenting an image of harmony even when tensions are simmering underneath. Catherine was bound by that code. She could not simply pull Meghan aside and confront her, nor could she involve palace aides without risking a leak or escalating the situation into something uncontrollable. So she watched, she noted, and she waited. The most telling moment came just weeks before Archie's birth was officially announced. The family attended a private charity event, closed to the press. Without cameras in the room, Meghan seemed less animated, less focused on her bump. At one point, she sat comfortably cross-legged on a low sofa, a posture that Catherine found remarkable for someone supposedly in the late stages of pregnancy. Catherine had struggled to sit cross-legged by the 6th month, let alone maintain it for more than a minute. Meghan did so effortlessly, chatting away without the subtle shifts of discomfort Catherine remembered all too well. By then, Catherine's observations had gone beyond idle curiosity. She was certain that something was off, even if she couldn't yet prove it. And the more she saw, the more she began to suspect that Meghan's pregnancy was not what it seemed, not just to her, but to the entire world watching. Yet Catherine's nature was not impulsive. She would not act without evidence, and she would not risk her credibility on rumor alone. So she resolved to keep watching, to gather every detail, every inconsistency, until she had enough to make a move that could not be dismissed. She didn't know it yet, but that decision, to remain silent until the right moment, would set the stage for one of the most explosive revelations the royal family had ever faced. If Meghan's pregnancy had been a carefully choreographed public performance in Britain, the baby shower in New York was its most extravagant act yet. Royal pregnancies, by tradition, were marked by quiet, understated preparations behind closed doors. Private family gatherings, discreet exchanges of gifts, and celebrations that the press rarely, if ever, got wind of. Meghan's event shattered that mold entirely. It was big, it was loud, and it was designed to be seen. Held in the penthouse suite of the Mark Hotel on Manhattan's Upper East Side, the shower was more Hollywood spectacle than royal custom. Paparazzi camped outside in the freezing February air for days, hoping to capture shots of the A-list guest list as they arrived in sleek black SUVs. Inside, reports described lavish floral arrangements, a dessert table groaning under the weight of pastel-colored confections, and harpists playing for entertainment. The decor was reportedly themed in soft neutrals, with every detail curated for maximum elegance. For Meghan's American friends, the event was a celebration of her journey into motherhood, a way to give her the kind of baby shower that was standard in their circles. But for royal watchers back in the UK, it felt almost alien. Baby showers were not a common royal tradition, and this one seemed so grand that it inevitably drew comparisons to celebrity gatherings. What jarred even more was how heavily it was covered by the press. Meghan, stepping out of the hotel in a chic maternity coat and high heels, cradled her bump for the cameras with a polished smile that looked like it had been rehearsed. The coverage was relentless, and while much of it was glowing, cracks began to form in the narrative. The first question was cost. Reports suggested the event, including private flights and the luxury suite, carried a price tag in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Critics questioned the optics of such extravagance, particularly for a member of a family funded by taxpayers. Meghan's defenders argued that friends had footed the bill, but the optics still clashed with the image of royal reserve the palace had tried to cultivate. The second question was more subtle but, in hindsight, more telling. Several guests posted discreet social media updates from inside the hotel. Nothing explicit, just glimpses of the decor or the food. In none of these posts was there a candid shot of Meghan interacting in a way that clearly confirmed her pregnancy. She posed for photos, she mingled, she laughed with friends, but always in ways that kept her bump at a certain distance from others, never in the unguarded moments one might expect at a gathering among close friends. For Catherine, the baby shower was another opportunity to observe from a distance. She had not been invited, a fact that tabloids seized upon as evidence of a rift between the two women. While Catherine maintained a dignified silence, those close to her say she found the spectacle puzzling. It wasn't just the lavishness. It was the way Meghan seemed to be using the event as another stage for the pregnancy narrative, while still tightly controlling access to anything that might dispel doubts. Some of the most scrutinized images came from Meghan's arrival and departure from the hotel. In one set, as she walked toward her vehicle, the bump appeared round and high, her coat neatly framing it. In another, taken just hours later as she left for the airport, the bump seemed slightly lower and more elongated. Fashion experts blamed lighting, posture, and the difference in clothing layers. But for those already questioning the pregnancy, it was one more inconsistency to add to the growing list. The unanswered questions surrounding the baby shower weren't just about appearances. There was also the matter of timing. Meghan had chosen to travel internationally while supposedly in her third trimester, a decision that surprised many, including some medical professionals. Long-haul flights are not typically advised for women late in pregnancy due to the risk of complications. Meghan insisted she was in excellent health and had her doctor's approval, but the ease with which she navigated the trip raised eyebrows for those familiar with the realities of late-term travel. Behind closed doors, the event was reportedly a point of tension within the royal family. Senior aides worried that it looked like a personal PR campaign rather than a private celebration. There were murmurs that Meghan had bypassed palace protocol in coordinating press coverage, ensuring that certain photographers knew where to be and when. The result was an event that generated exactly the kind of glossy imagery she seemed to thrive on, images that dominated the news cycle for days. But if the baby shower was meant to solidify the public's perception of Meghan as a glowing, expectant mother, it had the opposite effect for those who were already skeptical. Social media discussions dissected her every move, every outfit change, every public appearance before and after the trip. A few particularly observant critics noted that, upon returning to the UK, Meghan's bump appeared slightly different again, this time smaller and more compact, despite the fact that she should have been at her most visibly pregnant stage. Catherine, for her part, took note of all of this. Though she said nothing publicly, she paid attention to the details. How Meghan moved when she thought no one was watching, how the size and shape of her bump seemed to shift in subtle ways, and how tightly she controlled access to any situation where the pregnancy might be viewed in an unfiltered context. The baby shower, while outwardly a celebration, had become for Catherine yet another piece in a puzzle she was slowly assembling in her mind. In the weeks after the event, tensions between Meghan and the rest of the royal family seemed to deepen. The British press, no longer as uniformly glowing in its coverage, began to hint at unusual aspects of the Sussexes' approach to royal life. Words like private, controlled, and stage-managed began to appear in articles. And though the focus was rarely on the pregnancy itself, the subtext was clear. There was something about Meghan's public presentation that didn't quite align with tradition or reality. For the public, the baby shower was a glamorous interlude, a splash of Hollywood in the usually restrained royal world. For Catherine, it was another confirmation that Meghan's pregnancy was not unfolding as it should. Whether it was the ease of her travel, the tightly orchestrated imagery, or the absence of the unguarded, unpolished moments that so often define real life, Catherine came away from that period more certain than ever that there was more to the story than anyone was admitting. And in her mind, the unanswered questions were starting to outnumber the answers. The confrontation, when it came, did not erupt in front of cameras or in the glare of public attention. It unfolded in the quiet, carpeted corridors of a royal residence, far from the flashing bulbs of the press, far from the polite smiles and choreographed appearances. It was one of those moments that, in a family so steeped in protocol, would usually be avoided at all costs. Yet by this point, the unspoken tension between Catherine and Meghan had stretched thin enough that it could no longer be disguised. The occasion was a family gathering tied to a formal engagement. Several senior royals were present, though the event itself was small enough to allow for moments of privacy between conversations. Catherine had not come into the day with the intention of confronting Meghan. She was not the sort to ignite conflict recklessly. But weeks of observations, each one another chip in her confidence in the pregnancy narrative, had brought her to a point where her silence felt less like discretion and more like complicity. According to those with knowledge of the encounter, it began with Catherine finding herself alone with Meghan in a side room just off the main reception area. The space was lined with bookshelves and portraits, the kind of room where royals often retreated for a quiet word during long events. Meghan was checking her phone, her posture casual, her expression guarded but polite when Catherine stepped inside. There was no preamble, no soft lead-in. Catherine's opening was measured but direct. She remarked that she'd been concerned about Meghan's health during the recent New York trip, noting the strain such travel could put on someone late in pregnancy. On the surface, it was a neutral comment, one that could be taken as friendly concern. But Meghan's eyes narrowed, sensing the undercurrent. She replied that she was in perfect health, her doctor had no objections, and that she was strong enough to handle the travel without issue. Catherine's next words shifted the air in the room. She mentioned the inconsistencies she'd observed, not in a confrontational tone, but with the precision of someone stating facts. The size and shape of the bump seemed to vary. Meghan's movements and posture didn't always align with what Catherine had experienced herself 3 times over. The absence of certain physical signs, the ease with which Meghan crouched, crossed her legs, and navigated long days. These weren't accusations yet, but they were undeniably pointed. Meghan's demeanor changed. The polished calm gave way to something sharper, her voice tightening as she defended herself. She spoke of constant scrutiny, of the cruelty of having every movement analyzed, of how she felt Catherine was feeding into the same culture that had tormented her in the press. She accused Catherine of allowing personal bias to cloud her judgment, hinting that there had always been a lack of warmth between them. For Catherine, this was not about warmth or personal history. She calmly explained that her concerns were not rooted in gossip or press narratives. They were rooted in what she had personally witnessed. She reiterated her understanding of how pregnancy changes a woman's body and movements, and how those changes had been absent in Meghan's case. Her tone remained even, but the implication was unavoidable. Catherine believed something about the pregnancy was not genuine. The silence that followed was heavy. Meghan's eyes, according to one account, hardened. She denied outright that there was anything false about her pregnancy, accusing Catherine of crossing a line. She insisted that Archie was real, that her experiences were her own, and that any differences between them were due to individual physiology and lifestyle. But even as she spoke, the tension in her voice betrayed that she was not simply brushing this off. The conversation could have escalated into a full argument, but Catherine chose to stop short. She made it clear she had no desire to humiliate Meghan or cause public scandal, at least, not without cause that could withstand any level of scrutiny. She told Meghan she hoped she was wrong, that nothing would please her more than to be proven mistaken. But she also made it clear she would continue to watch, and that the integrity of the monarchy was not something she would compromise for the sake of avoiding discomfort. When they left the room, both women had composed themselves. Catherine's face was as neutral as ever. Meghan's expression was unreadable but tighter than before. In the reception, they resumed their public roles, standing in proximity but not close enough to invite casual photographs of warmth or camaraderie. To the other guests, nothing seemed amiss. But those closest to the family noticed the shift in the weeks that followed. Meghan and Catherine were rarely seen engaging even in the polite, superficial exchanges that duty required. Joint appearances were reduced, and when unavoidable, they were choreographed so that the two women had minimal direct interaction. The distance between them was now palpable, and those who had been in the palace long enough understood that something had broken in their already fragile relationship. The private confrontation also marked a turning point for Catherine internally. Until that day, she had been content to observe silently, building a mental case. Afterward, she began to gather details more actively, not in a way that could be traced back to her directly, but with the quiet, disciplined approach of someone who knew that one day, her suspicions might need to be backed with hard proof. She began discreetly comparing notes with those in the royal household who had been present during Meghan's engagements, asking innocuous questions that, to them, may have seemed like idle curiosity. Meghan, for her part, seemed more guarded than ever in Catherine's presence. Some within her circle believed the Duchess of Sussex suspected Catherine might try to undermine her. Others thought Meghan viewed Catherine's questions as a direct betrayal, proof that she was not trusted even within the family. Whatever her perception, Meghan began to tighten her control over public appearances, limiting opportunities for anyone, even family, to see her in moments that were not carefully managed. The encounter did not end the speculation, it intensified it. Catherine had not leaked anything to the press, but her watchfulness seemed to ripple through palace staff. Those who worked closely with both women could feel the frost between them and began whispering about what might have happened behind closed doors. The royal household is a place where whispers travel faster than official memos, and though no one could confirm the details, it became widely understood among insiders that Catherine had privately challenged Meghan over the pregnancy. If Meghan thought the confrontation would silence Catherine, she was mistaken. If Catherine thought the confrontation would prompt Meghan to offer clarity, she was equally mistaken. What it did achieve was a mutual understanding. They were now on opposite sides of a line that neither would cross back over. And from that moment, the question was no longer whether Catherine suspected something. It was whether she would ever bring her suspicions into the light. In royal tradition, the christening of a new baby is more than just a family ceremony. It's a public milestone. For generations, the event has been a delicate balancing act between solemn religious ritual and carefully managed public relations. The location, the guest list, the godparents, and most importantly, the images released afterward have always been part of the choreography. The public might not be inside the chapel, but they are given enough to feel included. There are photographs of the child, glimpses of the proud parents, and a clear sense that the baby is not just a private family member, but also a figure of national interest. When the time came for Archie's christening, however, that formula was thrown out. From the very beginning, Meghan and Harry made it clear they would be doing things differently. There would be no press access to the chapel, no public procession, no opportunity for photographers to capture the family arriving or leaving. Even the identities of the godparents would remain a mystery, an unprecedented level of secrecy for a royal christening. At first, the explanation seemed straightforward. The couple cited their desire to protect Archie's privacy, to keep the moment intimate and shielded from public scrutiny. But for those who had been following the undercurrent of speculation around Meghan's pregnancy, the decision looked less like an act of parental protectiveness and more like another step in controlling access to the child entirely. The service itself was held in the private chapel at Windsor Castle, a location that made it even easier to control the flow of information. Only a handful of guests attended, mostly close family and a select few friends. The royal rota photographers, accustomed to being given at least some access to major family events, were left standing outside the castle walls. When the official photographs were released, they were as polished and stage-managed as any magazine spread. Taken by a trusted royal photographer inside Windsor Castle, they showed Meghan and Harry beaming, surrounded by a small group of family members, with Archie in the center of it all. But the baby, swaddled in the traditional christening gown, was positioned in a way that made it difficult to see his features clearly. In the most widely circulated image, his face was partially turned away, his expression unreadable. For the casual viewer, the photos were charming enough, another elegant moment in the royal family's history. But for those already doubting the narrative, they raised more questions than they answered. Why? If this was a joyous family occasion, were the images so tightly cropped, so controlled? Why was there not a single candid shot of Archie interacting naturally with anyone in the room? In every frame, the child appeared as an object to be displayed rather than a participant in a family gathering. Catherine, present at the service, noticed more than what the public saw. She had expected the day might finally put lingering questions to rest. After all, a christening is a close, intimate event. If there were any doubts, seeing Archie up close should have dispelled them. But according to those close to her, what she saw did not ease her concerns. From her vantage point, the baby seemed unusually still, almost unnaturally calm for an infant of that age in such a bustling environment. There was none of the restless fidgeting, none of the spontaneous facial expressions she remembered so vividly from her own children's christenings. When the gown was adjusted, there was no reflexive movement of small legs or arms, no curious glances toward the new surroundings. Catherine didn't leap to conclusions in that moment, but she filed the observation away with all the others. The lack of transparency extended beyond the photographs. The refusal to name the godparents was explained as a desire to protect their privacy, but it